guess we're live.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Indexer Office Hours 41. Our agenda is looking a bit thin this week, I'm afraid, but I'm sure we can find some topics to cover. What I wanted to start with was something Oliver brought up in chat. If you're ready, Oliver, to talk about your forum post on governance.
Yes, I can. So I have just posted a new forum post about an hour or two ago, and it's with regards to our community snapshot voting, and in particular the strategy that we follow there. So we've implemented that, 𝗨𝘀𝗀𝗧𝗂 did earlier this year, with a strategy that assigns 33% of voting power to holders, delegators, and indexers. So one of the things that Dave himself mentioned in the post is that the strategy should be revisited for things such as curators currently not being reflected in the strategy, because it was not a role that existed at the time that when we deployed it. So it's something that definitely makes sense to go back just for that reason. And then I've provided a little bit more detail on the experience that I think we all have gained throughout the year on community snapshot voting. One interesting takeaway being that the current strategy of 30% per group actually has a bit of a opposite effect of what we would like to see, meaning that the more stake we get into the network means as a result that network participants, individual network participants, voting power actually continues to go down over time as network stake increases, and non-network participants' voting power in return increases based on the strategy that we have. It's not a concern at this point because we are at about 27%. It really just becomes a little bit more concerning as numbers grow past 50%, which we're still way off from those numbers. But I think it is a good time to just revisit that and see if the different type of voting strategy might be more appropriate to reflect, the mutual goals that we have in the network. Along with that, a third problem that I think I've certainly witnessed in the community is that a number of times I've seen people asking, so what is my voting power? And it's not an easy question to answer, in fact, because it changes every time with every new snapshot vote, depending on how stake changes have occurred in the network, and can go up or down. For example, indexers, when we started out early in the year based on the network stake, they had about a 14x voting power per GRT. And that indexer network stake has grown throughout the year. And based on the new numbers that we have now in November, it's more about 8x. So that actually changed quite a bit. But the point being is that it can be different every time we have a snapshot vote. So what I am proposing, kind of like the bottom line of it, is something that introduces curators into the voting mix, and curators and subgraph developers, in fact, because I think that subgraph developers are covered by the curator, assuming that most subgraph devs would signal first on the bonding curve for their own subgraphs. And the weighting that I propose is a fixed weighting, and two criteria that I've used here. First of all, I think two things are important when it comes to voting power that I recognize, what my personal opinion is, and that is the knowledge of the network and the protocol, and also the responsibilities that individual participants carry in the protocol function and services. So I think directionally what we had, where we had indexers with the highest weighting, I do still support that. It's just a different level that I am proposing in the forum post, which is 1 for the non-network participant, 3x for delegator, 5x for a curator, and then 7x for indexer. So that's the idea and the proposal that I've put out there. I hope for some lively discussions. I hope that we have a lot of people coming into the discussions with a lot of viewpoints on it and feedback.
Yeah, that's actually really good. I think I recall, I'm not sure if this is live yet, but I recall revisiting this issue of not having curation as part of voting power. We discussed this with Ariel, I think a few months back, And if I recall correctly, there was some... What?
Oh, nothing.
Oh yeah. We discussed this with Ariel, and I think we ended up implementing some form of voting power calculation for curators too. It's not easy because of because curators are intrinsically bonded to the bonding curves. So the GRT values that they have change over time if the bonding curve changes. But we ended up with some form of voting power tracking using the old rules, of course, the 30% per group. I think that's what we ended up doing. I don't remember if this is live. I'm actually asking Ariel if this is live, but I think we did at least a proof of concept of this. But still this second part of the proposal, which is like fixing the amount of voting power per GRT for each of the groups, is still a really nice discussion. But at least adding the curators to the snapshot strategies, that's already either done or on the works, almost done. So yeah.
Looking at Snapshot today, it doesn't look like there is a specific deployment targeting curators.
Maybe the proof of concept didn't go live yet.
Yeah.
But I know for sure that we've been working on that a little bit with Ariel and another developer called Gabby. But yeah, that hasn't been forgotten. That's what I mean.
So, right. Oliver, is the kind of basis of your what you're proposing initially here kind of weighted more towards those who would be more or less expected to have a more active hand in the protocol? Is that what you're going for here?
That is correct, and it is, I would say, a continuation of how it is already today, because delegators have more voting powers than non-network participants, and indexers have more voting power than delegators, and that basic principle is still the same, because I personally do support it. It's just that I think the big change here is, instead of a continually new voting power number that you get with every snapshot vote, I'm proposing just a fixed set of voting power so that everyone knows, okay, for my delegation GRT, I get 3x vote. For my indexer GRT, I get 7x vote.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah, I'm not making any kind of judgment on the numbers you've come up with. Just wonder where it started from.
And again, it's in a proposal, so I welcome any feedback. And Juan, I do remember the discussions that we've had, but at this point, it's not yet deployed. That update you were talking about.
I think it's, I was asking Ariel, I think it's deployed, but it's going to reflect on the next voting that happens in Snapshot. It's not retroactive, of course. So that's why it might not be showing. I don't really know. But yeah, apparently that's what's going on.
Okay.
So has anyone else got any comments on that, or should we move on? Okay. Okay, some of our regular sections then. NodeWatch. There's been a new release for both 𝗀 and 𝗂𝗂𝗀𝗀. From what I've seen, it's just more about optimizations and bug fixes. I don't know if anyone's run into any problems, at least with the latest 𝗂𝗂𝗀𝗀 release. I didn't try that yet, but 𝗀 is working fine for me on the subs that it's applicable to.
All good on the latest 𝗂𝗂𝗀𝗀𝗀 release.
One thing that's interesting me a bit is it seems that there's been yet another update for Open Ethereum, and I'm a bit confused why that's still hanging. I mean, I'm not complaining about client diversity, but I thought the plan was just to dump this client and move all efforts to 𝗂𝗂𝗀𝗀𝗀. Someone seems to have picked up the torch there. Just a side note as well, I wondered if anyone, there's no releases that I've seen yet. I think you might be able to build a release for one of these, but has anyone looked into or tried either of these two clients, 𝗨𝘀𝗲𝗂 and 𝗂𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀?
I don't think they're exactly in a state to...
No.
Yeah.
No, yeah. Not. I would not use them on my graph stack, put it that way.
I mean, like, I don't even think they're capable of responding to the full breadth of RPC requests right now. Like, I think they're really, exploratory or early stage.
I thought 𝗨𝗂𝗪 was a bit further along than that actually, but 𝗨𝘀𝗲 seemed pretty bare bones for now.
Yeah, those are basically re-implementations of 𝗨𝗀𝗃𝗀, but rather than using Go, one is using C and the other one is using Rust, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, 𝗨𝘀𝗲 C++.
Not fully new. It's basically a code rewrite of in a different language.
Yeah.
There are changes though. So like the database internals, for example, are different, and there are some minor schema changes. But yeah, it's largely a re-implementation, but it's not like for like.
I think the main idea from what I read about them was that they'll go with a flat file structure. Could be mistaken. I didn't hear about either of them until today.
Yeah, I think both use the flat file based staged sync.
Okay. Indexer tooling, nothing going on there. Nothing in Repo Watch either, though I have seen mentions that there's a new release of GraphNode coming this week. I guess it's not out yet, but any day now. Just keep an eye out for that, I would say. Forum highlights. I went through the past week's threads on the forum, and I couldn't find anything really super applicable to us unless I've missed something. So I was wondering if anyone had any suggestions on topics to cover today. One suggestion that came to me via Chris was that we could discuss multi-chain readiness. So as in, which chains are indexers already running? What are they prepared to run? How is everyone preparing for mainnet migration that is hopefully getting closer and closer and becoming quite imminent? And of course, you don't all have to answer at once. I know, for example, like if anyone ever speaks about BSC in the indexer community, they know 𝗀𝗀 is the go-to guy. I know a number of you run Solana nodes, which I guess will be something that becomes more applicable once we get that fire hosed in. But as far as any other chains that have been mentioned, is anyone, for example, running Near?
I was running it during their testnet, but didn't touch it since then.
I'm running it now.
Yeah, we also worked with Near, but not in my team particularly, but in our company. And I think we will prepare to Near in the nearest weeks or so.
Yeah, I've also, same State Machine. I was in the Near beta testnet. I can't remember if that was called Chains of, I can't remember, Chain Wars, Stake Wars, something like that. But I think Oliver put out his indexer survey. I don't know if have I missed the results of that being released, or has anything come of that, Oliver? I'm just wondering what the landscape's looking like on the inside as far as how many indexers have signaled that they're willing to support a lot of these chains that are coming.
Yeah, so we do have some data there. We got a total of 25 responses back. The data analytics team will help us just getting the data aggregated and cleaned up so that we have something that is presentable. Expect that to happen hopefully in the next couple of weeks, and then we can present some of the findings here at Index office hours, including things like readiness for other blockchains and experience in that area.
Yeah, because the impression I get is, I mean, I'm sure there's some people that are scaling up and some people that are starting to touch chains that they might have not had hands-on with yet, maybe even playing around with Firehose. I know there's a few people that are. I feel like, I don't know, it's a little too quiet for me on that front, which is why I ask who is actually preparing for this. Because, of course, the mainnet traffic has to switch over eventually, and if you're one of the few that has bothered to prepare for this moment, you're going to probably be in a much better position than most people.
Yeah, I guess it depends on what kind of networks are going to support it in which way. You mentioned Near before, and my understanding is that running Near indexing will be done through running the near firehose and not by running a near classic RPC. So it's this kind of information that is sort of missing in a sense to really start preparing. On the other hand, I'm also not sure on how ready the entire logic is for. There was something with the agent managing and the block times being different on the different chains, and therefore it got confused. I'm not sure if that problem has been resolved or not. Because if it's not, then something will go quite wrong with our allocations. So yeah, I've been running other chains even during mission control. I actually indexed on XDAI chain. It's useful to get experience with different chains, in my opinion. But in terms of mainnet readiness, yeah, I'm not sure how meaningful that already can be done, as there is a lot of information that's probably be required.
Yeah, so there are a few things there. I think the question of whether it is firehose or RPC will persist for EVM-based chains, but any new change, so near, Cosmos, Solana, and whatever else starts coming down the pipe will be firehose-based. I think that we can confidently make that assumption. I know, obviously, technical timelines are always difficult, but there's an ambition to ship Firehose support for EVM by the end of the year. And at that point, Firehose becomes a kind of viable ingestion alternative to RPC. But I would imagine that for most EVM chains, RPC will be the predominant ingestion method, except for just the really high throughput stuff where RPC isn't feasible. The other thing I'd say is a lot of what preparing for new chains means is about preparing for Firehose. And Firehose as a workload is quite different to RPC workloads. And so, for example, we all know that particularly on these high throughput chains, maintaining nodes that can support the RPC workload typically requires very high performance hardware and storage, which is quite expensive. But with Firehose, all of that data goes into these flat files, and there isn't really this like CPU or processing intensive thing like a node sitting on top of the data for it to be useful. So we can optimize our infrastructure to have lots of very low cost storage that can be essentially streamed over in parallel. So there are like some infrastructural changes that we can begin to make to prepare for this. And so, for example, what I've been exploring is essentially like S3 object compatible storage and even block storage solutions like Ceph and Minio and TrueNAS and these family of solutions. Like we'll all need a resilient place to store terabytes and terabytes of flat files.
Yeah, that's the starting point, really, isn't it? It's going to be your infrastructure, regardless of what chains you've been investigating. Hopefully people are at least addressing that if they're not addressing, discovering new chains and spinning those endpoints up. But yeah, I mean, I have access to certain RPCs such as, Solana and etc. But if there's going to be some other consideration required there, then like Cone said, it would be good to have a bit more info about that so that we can prepare ourselves.
Yeah, totally. But I do think it's fair to assume anything that isn't EVM will be Firehose based. And that will involve running an instrumented full node.
Right. I'm presuming that the requirements are going to be different, but I'm not entirely sure how different in certain cases. I guess that might be a case by case basis.
I mean, eventually, the amount of flat files you have is still gonna be proportional to the amount of data that is in the chain. So I think someone from Streaming Fast posted like how big the chains were before, and I think there are still some differences between Ethereum and BSC, for example. And I imagine that something like Solana will also be still a significant amount of data. So there's still going to be that sort of differences between chains depending on the amount of information that is in there that we still need to store. An Ethereum full node will be easier on your ops than a BSC full node. Those things still remain. I do agree that I think anything that's non-EVM, that's going to be Firehose exclusive, because it's just a lot easier. But when we're talking about Firehose right now, you can run Firehose in combination with basically compiled Go binaries that do the indexing for you, rather than the classic indexer process. But I seem to remember there has been conversation on sort of redesigning that system so that the existing indexer node can sort of ingest the data from the Firehose directly, which is a different kind of operating model. So that's another question mark that I definitely still have on the future of indexing, so to say.
I think just on that, yeah. So inside GraphNode, there's this thing called a block stream. And at the moment, that block stream is kind of populated with data via RPC, but there's already a implementation of Blockstream in GraphNode that sources its data from the Firehose. And when I said that there's an ambition to have kind of full EVM support in GraphNode via the Firehose by the end of the year, I kind of meant that Firehose block ingester would reach roughly feature parity with the JSON RPC block ingester. So that is actually not very far off. And the intention, I didn't 100% follow what you were saying about the Go binaries thing. I don't know if you were talking about Sparkle there, but the idea certainly is that all of the learnings and technology that Streaming Fast has developed with Sparkle will go into GraphNode. So there won't really be like intermediary, processes. Like GraphNode will be responsible for both indexing and querying as it is today, but just with Firehose.
Yeah, when you talk about that the stream would directly be ingested by the indexer from the Firehose, do you know if it's directly accessing the files on disk, or is it using the gRPC or?
Yeah. So it's a binary stream over gRPC from the Firehose process. There's that like architecture diagram with the merger, the relayers, the nodes, and so. And the Firehose process actually serves the gRPC stream, and GraphNode will connect directly to that.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, it would have been cool if it would just touch the disks on the touch the files on the disk. But yeah, I guess the gRPC makes sense.
Yeah, I think particularly, if you're as a community, like if we look to index something like Solana, like you need to be provisioning hundreds of terabytes in, the order of hundreds of terabytes of storage. So it's really critical to, decouple these components and be, yeah.
Any other thoughts on any of that besides what was just said? Or any other topics that anybody wants to cover this week? Like I said, the agenda was a bit empty. Okay, well, if we haven't got anything to speak about, we might have to wrap up early, which would be a bit of a shame because we're we're only halfway through.
What's the best way to play with the Firehose for now? Is it BSC or Ethereum?
The one you fancy most?
But I saw that Ethereum is pretty old version in the repo.
Is it? I haven't checked.
Maybe it's already updated. Need to check it out. But which repo?
I can jump in. I joined late, so I'm not sure if you talk about this, but maybe if release schedule for this week.
Martin, your microphone is really bad. I don't know why.
Yeah, I didn't get that either.
Yeah, the last Ethereum-based release is 22 days ago, and is tagged 1.10.12.
Oh, not that bad. Could you drop a link to Office Hours chat, please?
Yeah.
I think it would be useful if somebody who has the who's been playing with this for a while. I'm not saying I don't think this should be on the on the plate for Alec or anyone else that's streaming fast, but an indexer who's been there since the start. So maybe Cohen, or I know 𝗨𝗂𝗂𝗧 has been in the Firehose chat since the beginning. If one of you would do like a half-hour workshop to show us how you set it up, I think that would be really helpful for people to get context and ask some questions, if you'd be up for doing something like that.
Yeah, I think the repo has the documentation in the README has improved quite a lot. Since that's done, I reset my old Firehose that had some problems, and I started from scratch. I don't know, a month ago or something. Yeah, if there's a need for explanation, then yeah, I don't know. I can try to imagine something, but I think the best thing to do is just to start building with it and to start playing with it. I mean, it is index or office hours. I would like to think that we are all here quite comfortable in running something on a server and seeing what it does or doesn't do. But yeah, if there is a need, I can try to come up with something. But it's basically installing Go, compiling the management process, compiling the instrumented versions of Get for whatever chain you want, include the Genesis file for when you're not doing Ethereum, and that's pretty much it. I mean, you can go beyond that afterwards, but the basic configuration is just the all-in-one setup that is now documented in the repo.
Yeah, it's just I think sometimes it's nice for people to see context, right? It's all fair and well if it's okay for you, to experiment with stuff. I mean, I'm the same, but some people benefit a lot from some visual context. This was my only thought. And it's just also a central place to ask some questions that will come off a session of maybe showing how you deploy or how you have deployed your Firehose solution, and then it'd just be a casual session. Nothing. It doesn't have to be structured or anything. It'd just be a casual session with you showing what you've done or how you do it.
Yeah. Yeah. If there are some specific questions, maybe that would help shape the content.
Yep, I've definitely got some questions, some operational questions I'd ask on a session like that.
Cool. Yeah, or submit in advance so that I have more of an idea of what people are looking for. That would be great.
I'm playing with the Firehose a little bit. Not yet in a place to give a walkthrough, but I think maybe early January will be in a good place to host a session like that, and kind of how well tech live demos go. Can have a bash.
Excuse me. Is Adam? Adam, are you with us? Yes. Hello, Adam. Are you able to talk? Wondering if you wanted to talk about anything on the core development notes. I'm just reading through right now. Martin linked them in chat. Anything specific you'd like to talk about there?
So much good stuff in there.
Yeah, new index or node graph, new graph node release. Work on the Firehose. Multi-blockchain work for Tendermint and Solana. So that's Cosmos and Solana. More progress on Near. Is anyone, I think maybe it's been asked already and I wasn't here, but has anyone deployed anything for Near so far?
Nobody's deployed. A couple of people said they're running a Near node or have run it in the past, but nobody with regards to Graph or prepping for Graph, from what I understand. I can see Adam unmuting himself. I think he's having mic problems.
Oh, the new Rust gateway is live as well. I forgot about that. I'm really interested to know where were the problems, and have they seen improvements in wherever the exact problems were? Because from my side as an indexer, I don't really see any difference. I wouldn't know where to look for, to see a difference.
Well, I think we can blame this one on Ford for not being here. Oh, maybe Leo could speak to this. I've just noticed he's here.
Regarding indexer release, Ford I think released 18.3, and it introduces batch claim many, and you'll have to have a new environment variable if you want to enable a threshold for that, which is separate from the normal claim threshold that we had before. So if you upgrade and start it, it will start claiming, and the transactions are like between $500 and $1,000 each. So good luck with that. It burned me on 3 different or 4 different nodes when I tested, fortunately.
Yikes, we might need to adjust the default for those parameters. Because I think the defaults will recreate the existing claim behavior. Although, I guess before the claim was, I think maybe we split that out into a new flag. But for anyone that deploys that, definitely make sure to set those flags. There are actually 2 that I mentioned in the last indexer office hours. One that kind of sets the minimum amount of GRT you would want to claim, and there's that's really a question of economic viability. So you probably never want to claim a 1 GRT rebate. And then the other parameter is the batch size, like how much pending claims should be before it attempts to claim a batch.
So this is 18.3, right?
Yep.
I think I'm on 18.1 or 18.2.
So is it safe to use it in mainnet?
Yeah, it is safe, but yeah, assuming you have the right flags and it doesn't start claiming stuff that you don't want to.
We need to adjust thresholds.
Yep. So in addition to the regular normal threshold for each individual allocation, now you'll have a batch threshold that you'll have to set. Yeah, if you don't set it, it will start claiming, and those claims are huge in terms of like gas price.
Can we add stuff like this to the tags or something on GitHub so that people are aware of these things? Because usually when it's not a main release,
It should be in the release notes, shouldn't it?
well, I'm assuming it should be here. Like if I link you where I would normally go to find the latest version.
Yeah, I don't believe that 0.18.3 has actually been promoted for mainnet use yet.
Oh no, it has not. I just tested it because Ford asked me to.
I'll often test, versions that still haven't been tagged as a release, just because I know there's some really significant upgrades in them. Like I've been running 18.2 for, since it was pushed. But obviously, I'm going to keep continuing to do that if there's no main releases put out. But we need to be, all these little things where there's money involved, they need to be noted somewhere obvious, so that an indexer who's going to try it immediately sees that, I need you to make sure you set these new flags, or you could potentially waste thousands of dollars. I think that's really important. And how do we deal with that? Unless we change the actual release process, which is unlikely, right, at this point. Indexers are going to tinker with the new stuff. We need to be getting warnings like this into the tags, if that's possible.
Well, whenever you create a new release or a tag, you can add release notes or tag notes, I guess. I don't know. I know for sure that releases do have comments or release notes, but I'm not entirely sure about tags.
Yeah, I'm a complete noob when it comes to GitHub, so I don't know. And
yeah,
also,
I think
we need to add these, potentially post-release or post-tagging. Like, for example, if there was an option here for me to just put an issue in and say, can you add something to this, please, Ford, then I'd do it.
Yeah, I think
it should do it.
The notes can only be added to an actual release, not just to a
Right.
tag. And so the latest release is 0.17.
Yeah.
So yeah, just adding notes for that kind of thing just comes later in the release process. To be super safe, one shouldn't use a release that hasn't been tagged as one.
Yeah, this is problematic because 0.17 is problematic, right? We know that there's a lot of stuff that upstream of 0.17 has fixed. That's why I moved off 0.17, because a lot of issues with that, with the sort of sequencing for transactions or allocations were resolved after 0.17. I feel like we're always going to be in this situation where indexers want to be ahead of the actual release tags, unless
I disagree.
Change the release process.
Maybe that's what needs to happen, but we cannot have the majority of indexes testing in prod. I think we need to expect that the majority of production indexes are running the latest tagged release, and pre-release testing either happens on testnet or maybe we need to.
Yeah, I think some time ago we were advocating for the opposite, that we want a proper release operation procedure, and that stuff gets tested on testnet first before running it on mainnet. And this seems to be completely a 180 from that. Let's just test everything on mainnet and then potentially waste a lot of money. That's not the direction I think we should take.
I'm not advocating for this, guys. I'm advocating for whatever has me running my indexer to its best capability, right? So, I guess just to round this up, the question really is, I know that Adam and the team have been working on improving integration testing. So is this perceived issue something that would be resolved via the improved integration testing? Would be the question I'd be asking.
No. I don't think so. I don't think the integration testing matrix is designed to pick up something like this particular issue. But the plan still is very much to rely more heavily on the testnet, and to kind of formally introduce the testnet into the release process. The details of that haven't been figured out, and there's a bit of a chicken and egg situation, because the testnet isn't hugely useful to core developers and to the software development lifecycle so long as indexers are not actively engaged and are participating there. So that's a challenge, but equally, there's not a lot of utility for participating for indexers because we don't have any significant query volumes on testnet or a diversity of subgraph deployment. So yeah, it's frustrating that some of this stuff is moving as slowly as it is, but I do think there's recognition of the issues, and at least my understanding of the plan is that the testnet, first of all, we need to make it more useful for all of us, and then once we have higher levels of indexer participation, it will be incorporated into the release process for certain parts of the stack.
Do you think that could present some kind of chicken and egg situation where indexers aren't joining in with testnet because they don't find it useful, and the devs aren't interested in it because they're not getting participation?
Yeah, I think the first step is to make it useful for indexers, and that it, so long as there is kind of representative query load flowing onto the testnet, and there is a diverse set of subgraphs to index and test different features on. When we're in that place, I think the testnet becomes useful for indexers again. So I think that's the first step, and then as indexer adoption increases, hopefully that shifts the balance for core developers as well. But I'd also like to see more social initiatives to drive participation in the testnet. Like, as engaged indexers, this is a public good that we all share, and we're not going to get paid for it, but there is benefit to testing our workflows and our infrastructure in that environment when it's useful. So yeah, I hope that we can kind of drive, the testnet and adoption, almost like culturally in our indexing.
Yeah.
It has to be done that way, really, because I think otherwise the only other path is incentives, and I see quite a few networks falling into that trap. But then, even if incentives are just the initial answer, they just become expected beyond that.
POAPs.
What was that, sorry?
I love me a POAP.
POAPs. Yeah, exactly. All about them POAPs.
One thing I wanted to ask about was plans for layer 2. I feel like I've heard chatter about it on these calls. Should we just do one big testnet with a bunch of changes? If we're going to layer 2 for some of these, I actually am kind of curious how new chains will be supported. Will things still happen on Ethereum mainnet, or if we go to a layer 2, will sort of the accounting and payouts continue to happen on Ethereum, or will it be a separate kind of process there for each chain?
I think any answers you get at the moment, it would be speculation.
Definitely.
It's obvious that we want to move towards a more dynamic indexing arena where we can all, run fancy software that's optimizing our returns every, 30 seconds or less, right? And that's the type of thing that layer 2 will potentially unlock. But there's so many pitfalls or so many unanswered questions before we can get to that point around composability and, which one's going to be the most popular, and, does the settlement just rely specifically on, the layer 2 technology settlement to Ethereum? There's so many different questions. And then you've got to, you put on top of that ETH2 coming along as well, right? And what all of that brings into the mix, which is something I feel like we never talk about in comparison to layer 2. And I know it's not it's soon TM, right? But it's every month it's getting closer to the merge potentially. Gary has linked a good thing there, though. There's a good open discussion going on right now on the forums that was started by a community member, and you'll see some posts in there from all different parts of the community. It's a good read. I'd recommend if you've got some thoughts, Nate, then that would be the place to stick them.
Okay. Anything else anyone would like to bring up? Now would be the time. We've got about 10 minutes left. Jim, you weren't here for the initial discussion we had about multi-chain readiness and what people are doing to prepare for that. I don't know if you had any 2 cents to add into that topic.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking a lot about, because I'm 100% self-hosted, right? So I can do, I've got a lot of flexibility when it comes to choosing solutions. I did catch the tail end of Chris's discussion there on, the research he's doing. And, myself and Chris are both talking quite regularly about, what the potential options are. I've been spending a lot of time looking at, things like Gen 4 NVMe performance and how you can build different types of storage, like custom storage on top of Gen 4 NVMEs. And, there's a million different routes you can go down. I had started looking at Ceph because Ceph, because of its multi-node nature, is one of the most high performance, both in terms of IOPS and throughput. For random read write, which is basically what we're doing all the time. But something like Ceph, I've recognized through the research, is you need to put serious OpEx or CapEx depending on how you want to do it. Do you want to pay a hyperscaler for their black box, or do you want to build your own Ceph nodes? It's a lot of money, and it's a lot of investment to go down those routes. So what I'm looking at right now is sort of intermediate things I can test, like building my own. Like I already have the basis for a petabyte NAS within my self-hosting. The question now is, can I get performance out of it that I need? And can I somehow strike a balance between the really high performance stuff and then the lower tiers of storage that, they don't need to be super high performance, but I still need them to be performant, right? Because with this, with the proliferation of node software that indexes are going to require, plus the load that you're going to have for flat files on the Firehose, you're just going to need tons and tons and tons of storage. More than you can possibly imagine, if things go the way we want them to go and we continue to grow in terms of indexing business. So I'm trying to think long term about that, so that the decisions I make for my business are decisions that I'll look back on and say, yeah, that was the reasonable decision to make at that point. Because the money you're talking about for, if you want to deploy your own Ceph nodes and you want to do it right, you're moving somewhere into the 6-figure range if you want to do it correctly and to build for the future. And I think that this lull that we have right now is the time to be thinking about this and making plans so that, when you need a petabyte of storage and half of that needs to be super fast storage, you're ready for it. You're ready for the demand that's coming. So that's where my head is at the moment. I'm also thinking a lot about hyperscaling the compute side. So I have a lot of very low density EPYC-like, so they're basically top end workstation AMD chips, and they're all very low density. So I'm thinking a lot now about how do I increase the density so I can fit more compute and more storage in a smaller space. Because like I said, I'm self-hosted. I have my own, all my own infrastructure. So I have to think about these things, like how much stuff can I actually fit in a rack. So yeah, that's kind of where my head is at the moment on getting ready for the next change.
The benefit of addressing scalable storage like you're doing as well is that you could move to something like multi-node rack servers. So, 2U have 4 dual core EPYCs in there or something, that's super high density, and you can scale up the compute from there. I think I haven't really heard many people except you talking about the their storage woes or faults, and I think that's going to be like one of the most critical issues. And even beyond that, well, besides that, should I say, scaling is setting up yourself with some kind of like scalable networking, having all the interfaces from the WAN all the way down to however you segment your LAN apart. Like maybe you run this in multiple racks or have multiple systems for different use cases. I don't know I haven't actually seen many people talking about that, and I'd be interested to see on the indexer survey how many people plan to stick to cloud for this, because it might be a lower upfront initial cost, but I think the leasing cost for that could kind of get away from you pretty quickly.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Once you start thinking about scaling your graph infrastructure from one node to many nodes, it just creates so many more questions, right? Like for me, I have a lot of very fast Gen 4 storage on all of my nodes, but I don't really have any sort of shared storage or like, one location, like a SAN basically, with a dedicated storage network. I don't have that, but I want that, right, in order to sort of enable these things. And then there's also the software, right, or sort of the middle, the DevOps layer, right? So your Docker Compose, your Docker Swarm, then all the way out to cubes, where you get the real benefit of, or the real ability to scale. But scaling across multiple, servers is like, it is not trivial stuff. And that's why it costs so much money to do these things in the cloud, right? And if you can figure out how to do these things yourself, because obviously there's a whole open compute framework for how to do hyperscaling without involving any clouds, but it's not anywhere near as simple. It's not like a nice Google SDK to do everything. You're doing things yourself, interrogating the Cubes cluster yourself. But I think, like Chris often talks about how, eventually the margin for indexers is going to become razor thin. Yeah. Who knows how quickly that's going to happen? But when it does start to happen, it's looking at areas like this around, doing your own hyperscaling and staying, as far out, staying away from the cloud as much as possible because of the costs. Those are the areas I think that will save huge amounts of money, and then make you a viable business as an indexer at scale.
Yeah, I've had the same thought since the beginning. I've always said to smaller indexers that the way they keep themselves in the game is by running more efficiently than other indexers, especially those that are in the cloud. But the problem is, I think a lot of people are kind of like averse to it somewhat when they see the price of some of these solutions. So yeah, you could be looking at 6, maybe even 7-figure outlay for your hardware, but that will set you up for many years down the line. Whereas somebody running on AWS, that's going to cost a lot, especially if things head into like a bear market and the purse strings get tighter.
Absolutely, yeah. If you need to have either a massive war chest, or you need to have, got your operational costs down so far that you can, your neck is up to blood and you can continue to run.
Yep.
Graphic. Kind of on the other end of the spectrum, because I'm not laying 100K out per Ceph node. I'm exploring spinning disk-based storage for the Firehose flat files. And in theory, that should work really well, in terms of like just price per terabyte of suitable storage. I think like I'm not in a position to have tested this, but my assumption is that spinning disk storage will work very well for indexing a kind of small to medium number of subgraphs in parallel, because actually, unlike a blockchain node that we need to run on this extremely high performance storage, the Firehose will do essentially purely sequential reads. So blockchain nodes do tons of random read-write, whereas the Firehose is really just sequential reads. So streaming files off of spinning disks is a very good match, and the kind of really poor random read performance won't be a problem. except when you begin to significantly scale up the number of subgraphs you are syncing in parallel, because then you're obviously needing to read or stream different segments of the overall chain history at the same time.
Kind of
That's
comes
very interesting.
it comes back a little there to what Jim was saying. So like the software level, or maybe somewhere in down there in the stack beyond the physical layer. It depends on what solution you go for. So you could find a solution that has storage tiering, and then once you kind of hit that ceiling for spinning disks, you've got your hot layer of SSDs or NVMEs that can kind of pick up the slack.
It doesn't work though for this workload. No, because you're always scanning through near enough the entire history. Even if there are some indices you can use to skip parts of the chain history, you are roughly always going from the beginning to the end. So across your full set of indexing workloads, there's not any particular kind of set of the chain that is like hottest. Does that make sense? So you can't really just cache a subset of the data set, and the workload exists across the whole thing.
Well, presumably you're pulling in data for more than one subgraph off each storage pool or disk. So I would have thought eventually latency would be a factor.
I think the issue is more that if you wanted to have the absolute, the same highest level performance for your entire scope of operation when it comes to the fire hose, you're essentially going to need to have, if it's the ZFS world, you would need to have an ARC cache that is equal to at least the size of the fire hose data, flat files, right? Or if you're doing very basic ZFS, another example, you would need to have enough memory to fit the entire ARC cache on the server's memory, right? So it's kind of interesting, and something I'd like to experiment with once I've got a fire hose up and running. The question is, how do you sort of measure things like this, right? Because one of the things I've learned is that, benchmarking when it comes to storage is real hard. And if you don't use the right tools, it's going to lead you down the wrong path. This goes the same for like benchmarking Postgres performance, right? It's the same thing. Like you can go and twiddle a few knobs and think you've improved things, but actually you've made them worse.
Synthetic benchmarks suck.
Yeah, and if you've already laid out for a solution and find out it sucks, that would suck even harder.
Mm-hmm.
Especially for distributed setups.
Yes. Well, we're 2 minutes away from the hour, so I think we should just wrap up there because a couple of us have our meetings to go to. So thanks everyone for turning up, and we'll see you again next week.
Thanks, bye.
Bye.
Cheers, everyone.
Bye.